Through the first installment, an update and a sequel, we learn about the identity of the antagonist of the story, Lamu, a llama-shaped humanoid who has an insatiable hunger for humans. He tends to hunt, attack and consume campers in the Lamu Forest Park, whom he sees as fruits, as if being a coping mechanism for him to wash down the atrocities that he commits. His real name is Larry Bruns, a victim himself who was experimented on by his father, Eric Bruns, a genius scientist who wanted to prove his breakthroughs to the science committee of making human and animal hybrids. Not able to find any volunteers, naturally, he turns to his own son, experimenting on him, turning him into a half-human, half-llama hybrid who ends up in a cave in the Lamu Forest Park. Isolated and abandoned, left with no other choice but to eat visitors in the park in order to survive. At first he eats wild berries, cherries and other sources of food, but they prove to be less than sufficient to keep him alive. I have made a few videos of the previous installments. If you haven't watched them, check them out for a detailed explanation to catch up to the current video. The story continues where it was left off, where Lamu hears the narrator's voice, encouraging him to go out of the cave and find the fruit friends in order to satiate his hunger. As we know from the main game, the fruit friends are a group of campers who get hunted by a deluded Lamu, thinking he is eating fruits. At the very end, the canon ending reveals how one of the campers manages to survive, using the car to get away, hitting Lamu in the process accidentally. As the protagonist survives, he has flashbacks of his group of friends who sadly fell victim to Lamu, dying in such horrible ways. He has horrible flashbacks filled with guilt and trauma that he was the only survivor, getting survival guilt. His friends in his imagination blame him for leaving him behind, all dying brutally while he got away. The protagonist, the sole survivor, jumps out of his bed, revealing that he has been having the same nightmare over and over again about his traumatic experience in the Lamu Forest Park, where he gets confronted by his now deceased friends. Due to his trauma, the protagonist refuses to accept this is over, thinking Lamu is still alive and flooding his room with newspapers and information about the incidents that took place in the national park and backstory information about Lamu. The newspapers on his floor unveil how he has discovered Lamu's backstory, learning that he was a kid called Larry Bruns, the child who was experimented on. Through a symbolic passage, the protagonist reads about the backstory of Lamu through newspapers that he has collected. The purpose behind experimenting on his son was for Eric, doing a research on finding cures for incurable diseases, doing something remarkable and a breakthrough for humanity. He intended to use animal DNA to help amputees, helping them regrow lost limbs, people with kidney diseases struggling with water retention, hence using camel DNA and axolotl, to mention a few. Dr. Eric Bruns worked with a prodigy scientist called Terry Argulo. Sometime later in 1977, the science committee investigates his results, discovering Eric Bruns has been falsifying the results of his experiments, labeling him as a fraud and eventually revoking his license. In another newspaper, we learn Eric Bruns was found dead in his house alongside his wife, Tina Bruns. Their son, Larry Bruns, was missing but presumed dead. The authorities at that time couldn't, in their wildest imagination, think that the son had transformed into a monster, eating his own parents. The corpses were found in a similar fashion Lamu kills his victims. Obviously, we know how this happened. Eric experimented on Larry, which turns him into an animal-human hybrid, who loses his memories and ends up becoming an insatiable monster, eating humans. Further in this narrow passage, the protagonist comes across another newspaper reporting on Eric's partner, Terry Argulo, who was caught shoplifting in 1987, 10 years after Eric died. The public's opinion at this point had already turned sour against him, considering him to be involved with Eric in falsifying the research results in the genetics. A subsequent newspaper reveals that Terry seemingly got involved with a pig farm called Dean's Pig Farm. There's an ad requiring delivery drivers, even if it is ex-convicted persons. So this could potentially mean this is the job that Terry got. On the other side of the story, we have the perspective of Lamu, who has managed to survive the accident, being specifically treated and placed inside a cage, which seems to be a secret and isolated building. A person comes along simply known as Tomato and shaped like tomato as it is through Lamu's perspective. This person has put an electric collar around Lamu's neck, shocking him in order to control him. In a menacing way, Tomato demands Lamu to help him with some errands involving experiments. friends. Tomato explains that he has some other bad friends who, just like Lamu, have done bad things, but yet they haven't been punished and he intends to punish them. Tomato continues explaining that he wants to continue his research and breakthroughs and everyone will get what they deserve. Tomato's identity is not revealed as of yet, but it seems very likely to be a vengeful, bitter, and resentful Terry who was casted out by the public and scientific committee. The scene cuts yet again and we see Lamu in a very basic doll-shaped appearance who is accompanied by two other large plushies. The pink plushie acts as his mother and the blue plushie acts as his father. This might be a look inside his personal life back when he was a normal child living with his parents, Tina and Eric, before he got experimented on. As Larry was experimented on at a very young age, at age 7, it seems his memories were impacted and his brain didn't fully develop. Hence why he sees the world through a restricted, childish and cartoony, washed-down manner. Larry was obsessed with llamas and had storybooks about them. The simple and basic depiction of him as a llama might even suggest how he imagined himself as, explaining his restricted and fuzzy memories, thinking of himself and his parents as llamas even before he turned into one. As Larry goes to bed, through a conversation between him and his mother, we learn something sinister, that it is possible that the mother was in on the experiment and even assisted Eric into turning Larry into a llama. She tells Larry that he needs to stay home even though he wants to go out and play with his neighbor kids. The mother explains that he needs to keep taking daddy's medicine in order to get better before going out. At this point it becomes a little ambiguous to what is going on in the house and why Larry is kept inside the house. Is he actually having an incurable disease that the father is working on a cure for him? And is that how he eventually turns into a llama? As Larry is falling asleep, he overhears a conversation between his father, Eric, and mother, Tina. The mother, clearly being worried, complains that Larry is not getting any better, but the father reassures her that more doses will cure his disease, something that remains ambiguous. So this shows that the mother was in belief Eric is trying to cure a condition Larry had. And through images we see through Larry's perspective, we can see how scrawny and weak his arms and body parts look. Maybe, just maybe, the father also wanted that, experimenting on his son not to turn him into a llama, but to treat his condition using llama DNA, an animal that is known for strength and endurance, something that Larry didn't have. The scene is then cut with the sole survivor of the Lamu Forest Park going into Dean's pig farm, a place Leon used to work in, the protagonist's camping friend who died. The farm closes soon after the incident and the protagonist goes there to investigate in order to feed his curiosity about Lamu and his never-ending nightmares. As it turns out, the farm belonged to Leon's parents, so the loss of their son possibly left them traumatized, even abandoning their business. Through a log note, we read about the progress of someone performing experiments. He explains how he is continuing the work that was left off by Dr. Bruns and that he will finally get what he deserves, explaining that he is performing genetic experiments with animal DNA. So it is clear that it is none other than Terry, Eric's old partner. So the scene that we saw earlier of Lamu trapped in a strange place could be Dean's pig farm, and Tomato is most likely Terry. The incident that took the lives of 3 campers in the forest, leaving the protagonist as the lone survivor, took place in 2002, which would mean Larry is now around 32 years old, as he was 7 years old in 1977. The outcome of the incident ended with Lamu being apprehended, or at least that is what the authorities claimed. So it is a mystery how Lamu ended up in the hands of Terry. As the protagonist explores the farm, he is tormented by more hallucinations, which unveil it was the protagonist who convinced Leon to go to the camping trip, and that is why he blames himself for his death. Tormented by visions and hallucinations of Leon, the protagonist is nudged by a person called Aaron, who happens to be Leon's brother. He is in the farm, confused to what is the protagonist doing here. Aaron explains that Terry worked in the farm as a delivery driver, but got fired just before the farm closed down. He eventually found a job in an aquarium, which happens to be the spin-off game where we find many animal-human hybrids, depicting how Terry continued his research in the aquarium, turning many humans into marine animal hybrids. Aaron shares his perspective on how losing a brother really hurts, but he gets on with his life, coming to the farm today as it is Leon's birthday. The protagonist, feeling terrible, bids Aaron farewell and leaves the farm. The scene yet again changes to the past, where Larry was a child back in his old house. It is his 8th birthday and both him and the mother are waiting for the father to get home so that they can celebrate it together. It appears as if the father was working long hours in the lab for his research. Eventually the father arrives home and they celebrate Larry's birthday. The mother becomes upset and resentful as she discovers Eric has been in the lab solely focused on his research, mistaking Larry's birthday gift with a leash. Eric, who is frustrated with work and allegations against him, ignores Tina and presents the last treatment dose to Larry, saying that it's the strongest that he and Terry have made. As he ignores Tina and injects Larry with his new strong dose anyway, things seem to be good for a moment as Larry's scrawny and weak body transforms into a healthy and strong body, which makes Eric happy that he might have found a cure for his son's disease, preventing him from ever going out. But soon enough, the transformation doesn't stop and Larry turns into a monster. His transformation causes his mind to be impacted as well, attacking his own parents to consume them, being extremely hungry. On his 8th birthday, a special day for him, Larry mistakenly kills his own parents, making it an extremely tragic day with him becoming a monster. Back to the current time, through the protagonist's perspective, we see how he is still looking for Terry, visiting the Sea Ecosystem Adventure Aquarium. In there, we find a diary note left behind. It seems to be by Terry, as he explains how he is now working as an assistant, serving snacks and selling tickets. A massive downgrade from being a prodigy genetic scientist. In there, the protagonist starts hallucinating yet again, but this time about Tasha, the other camping friend that he also convinced to go with them, which means he sees himself as a culprit, getting them there, leading to their deaths. He also sees Kin, someone who was worried to go to the Lamu Forest Park as he had heard stories of people dying there. The protagonist also convinced them through saying all these stories are just myths. Through exploring the locker room, we finally learn about Terry's address, with the protagonist learning that he is renting a basement in an apartment building, which makes it clear for him that he is using that space to keep Lamu. So it wasn't the farm that Terry used to keep Lamu, but instead, it was the basement of an apartment building. The perspective changes to Lamu's again. His childish mind becomes twisted, seeing the corpses of his parents as fruits and his subsequent victims as such. For some strange reason, the cage's door is opened and Lamu is able to move around freely in the basement, which happens to be a makeshift lab where Terry has been studying Lamu's anatomy and mind. Lamu takes the chance to hide behind the boxes before Terry can come. The perspective changes to the camping survivor, the protagonist who just arrives at the apartment building. He picks up an axe and goes to the basement, where he encounters Terry, who is desperate to prove himself, and to Dr. Bruns, who is long dead. He is blinded by his sense of purpose, thinking of the victims of Lamu as mere collateral. That's when Lamu appears behind Terry and quickly mauls and kills him. The protagonist is here to finish the job and kill Lamu, as he recalls seeing someone being at the scene when he hit Lamu with a car in the Lamu Forest Park. Seeing how the protagonist has an axe, Lamu tries to run away. As he does so, he witnesses the horrors that he has committed, the corpses of his parents, and all the other victims that he has brutally killed. Just as Lamu keeps on running, his conscience confronts him, being the simple depiction of him, his 7-year-old self, telling him that it is all too much to handle and they should stop running, as he is simply tired. This brings Lamu to tears, getting in touch with his child self, remembering things and barely managing to speak like a human again. Just as Lamu is weeping, recognizing that he has done too much and that he is tired, the swing of the axe by the protagonist brings his miserable life to an end, freeing Larry from his curse and also bringing justice to all the victims and also saving any future ones. And that brings us to the end of the sad story, Hungry Lamu 2. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to stay tuned for more by hitting on the subscribe button and the notification bell. As always, it's been your host Dar. Thanks for being here, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.